Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from last week. Let's get to it. Brandon and Julia video from last week. Dia says, wow, it's like watching my life on TV. My parents are exactly the same. Constant criticism, and instead of self-doubt, anytime their kids try to gain constant criticism and instilling self-doubt anytime their kids try to gain independence. I'm the only sibling out of my 5 adult siblings to move out of the home, and I did it as soon as I turned 18. My other siblings succumbed to my parents' manipulations and still live at home. My parents still criticize my place every time they visit and try to push me to come back home. Interesting. Yeah, well, Dia, I'm glad that you broke free, and hopefully your siblings can find peace as well. Tiffany and Ronald video. A says, I grew up somewhat poor, but my mother always made the simplest things seem wonderful. So that asparagus tree could have been made to look beautiful, depends on how you present things to a child. 100% agree. That didn't occur to me at the time, but absolutely. My parents were kind of that way as well. I actually recently asked my parents how they saw themselves in terms of income compared to other families in our neighborhood and community. And I always thought of ourselves as being pretty middle of the road, but my parents were saying, actually, no, we were not doing as well as other people were, but we just made ends meet, and we just made things exciting, and we prioritized really well. And yeah, because the way that I grew up, even though I would say we were, I don't know the classification, but doing okay, but definitely not as well as other people, I didn't feel that way. I felt, and I think a lot had to do with the way my parents, particularly my mom. My mom has a really bubbly personality and would always make things exciting. Ashley says, it's not just, so this is quoting me apparently, it's not just asking what do I want, it's asking what do they want? What do they want me to want? So I was commenting on Daniel and how there was this triangulation happening with their parents were dragging Daniel into it, and the mom was saying, what do you want? And Ronald was saying, what do you want? And although on the surface that's what do you want, on the subsurface, which is a much more prevalent message and that's common in situations like that, is the child will receive it as what do they want me to want, and what will I want that will cause the least amount of trouble. Ashley says, couldn't have said it any better. I was a child who was also triangulated into my parents' conflict. They divorced now, and I've been going to therapy. This is heartbreaking to watch. Well, good for you, Ashley, for going to therapy about it. It takes a long time. There's a lot of syndromes that can result from that kind of triangulation, and I hope that you heal, and it looks like you're on that road, which is good. Lila says, I think Ronald is massively immature and suffering from culturally ingrained toxic masculinity issues. South Africa is very sexist and is still very racist. Interesting, Lila. I didn't know that about South Africa. So, yeah, now we don't know precisely, but what about Ronald's behavior would be toxic masculinity in nature? We could say that he doesn't listen to her, that he doesn't want to adjust his life for her, that he doesn't feel like he needs to budget, that he feels entitled to do whatever he wants to with the money. That's certainly toxic masculinity. And why would people be this way? Well, one, it's just nice to have privilege and power, and it's hard to give it up. 2, when you are told that to be a real man you have to do these things, then you have to do these things, or you're encouraged to do these things. Another thing that I see, and this is quite obvious, I think, in cultural pockets, is when you put people down as a people, and men as a part of those people, then the men in that group will latch on to more toxic masculinity as a way of gaining at least some shred of self-esteem. The more you oppress a group of people, and I don't know if Ronald is in an oppressed group, it seems possible that he's oppressed by class and by poverty. I don't know that for sure. Or maybe just as someone with an addiction. And as a way of trying to gain at least some self-esteem, he ascribes to a shortcut that he perceives in toxic masculinity. I've seen it a lot where you take people and you just put them down and you make them feel like crap. And men are taught that they need to come out on top, that they need to be powerful, that they need to be successful and seen as the alpha, so to speak, which I don't like that language, but it's in our culture. And, a fast track that's available, that's served up on a platter, is toxic masculinity, where you essentially prove yourself as having worth by putting down your wife or putting down women or ascribing to ideals of aggression and hostility as a proof that you have worth, which, of course, doesn't work. TD says, "Oh yeah, at 17, I was triangulated by my parents during their divorce. Dad told me about his depression and how he tried to convince my mom to stay. Mom leaned on me for support, and I had to step in to keep the house in order for my younger siblings. I became a people pleaser as a result. I put myself last in all relationships." Well, TD, I'm sorry that you went through that, and I hope, similar to Ashley, that you are able to go to therapy and heal from that, because that's one of the only ways that you can heal from that, really. But it sounds like you're aware of it, and so you're getting there. Angela and Michael videos. Lauren says, "I get the impulse to block my partner." So Angela was blocking Michael, and I raised the question of, I don't really understand why people would do that. It seems like such a... I don't know. It's like, okay, if you want to break up with someone and you block them, all right. But it seems like a lot of people on the show, they'll just routinely block their partner as a way of trying to communicate that they're hurt, which I don't think works. Lauren says, "I get the impulse to block my partner when he hurts my feelings, but has yet to realize it. For me, it's a form of the silent treatment that my mom used on me when I hurt her feelings." So that's interesting, Lauren, that you experienced, and it is like a silent treatment for sure, and you experienced a silent treatment from your mom, which is extremely damaging, by the way, and hurtful, and you internalized that behavior, and now you have that impulse as well. It's not a good idea, though. As you say here, I never act on the impulse, though. I recognize that the impulse is telling me that my feelings are hurt and that I haven't adequately communicated that to my partner. Right, Lauren, you're right, that it's a barometer. Essentially, that impulse that you're having, in all likelihood, is just a indication that, my feelings must be, I'm having these thoughts of blocking my partner. Wait, let me take a beat. That's a symptom of something else. What is it? Oh yeah, I must be hurt right now, and I am resorting to something I experienced that was modeled to me by my mom. What's a more healthy way of trying to get my needs met, which is to communicate hurt feelings adequately and without accusation to your partner? AH says, "I know Americans aren't generally like this," because Angela said I'm an American. "I know Americans aren't generally like this, but as someone who lives in a tourist destination, this attitude that Angela has is the reason why people hate American tourists. We see it more than you'd think, and the entitlement goes further than you would think." Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, unfortunately. Hugo says, "When the only thing you have to be proud of is the place you were born, you need to re-examine your life." Yeah. Hoop says, "I think by I'm an American, Angela meant I'm not subservient to you like a traditional Nigerian woman would be because I'm an American." That's interesting, Hoop. I hadn't thought of that, but that, of course, makes a lot of sense, and that very well could be exactly what she meant. "It fits with her conception of the world that people are constantly trying to bully her, but she will not let that happen. She perceives some transgression, usually one that exists only in her head, comes at these bullies with full force, and of course, in reality, always ends up being the aggressor, the initiator, and the biggest bully." Yeah, Hoop, I really like your comment here. It's very intelligent and astute, good observation. And I didn't make that observation at the time, and I wish you were standing next to me and said, "Hey, by the way," because I think you're absolutely right, or at least I think it's a much better conceptualization, perhaps, than the one I had. I'm not sure. Daisy said, "I'm an American," quoting Angela. "I'm an American, Okay, LOL. It never occurs to me to yell, "I'm Belgian," in a conversation as if that would help my case. Yeah, Daisy, that is hilarious. I'm Belgian, when you're in an argument with your husband. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm an American. Oh, okay. I don't know what that has to do with it. Superibus says, I'm thankful and proud to say I've never had bad experience with Americans. The 4 times I've been there, they were welcoming, warm, and friendly. So don't worry, everyone does not have a bad image of you, smiley face. Well, thank you. Big Ed video. Ashley says, Hi, Dr. Honda. You mentioned Ed often bulldozes his partners. Would you please elaborate on what bulldozing is, why people do it, and the emotional toll it takes on others? I think I have several bulldozers in my life, and I want to gain more insight. Well, Ashley, this is a wonderful question because I've been using this word for a long time and haven't really formally defined it in my mind. And I don't have a lot of time to think about it right now because I'm doing this recording off the top of my head. So let me see if I can define it. Maybe I'll refine it later on. But bulldozing, when I say bulldozing, I mean it's when someone emotionally pressures through their discussions. And I suppose there's like the Angela version of bulldozing that she definitely does with Michael. That's pretty obvious to see, where she overtalks. She doesn't let him talk. She puts him down. Everything he says, she has some kind of aggression towards him. So that's one form of bulldozing. The Big Ed form of bulldozing, I mean, obviously he can do that too. We heard that in the phone call. But there's another version that I will use sometimes where you basically don't really listen. You have an agenda and you're just pushing your agenda. And the other person might be dealing, hopefully in a situation both people are flexible. But when one person is inflexible and bulldozing and they're up against a flexible person, the bulldozer will always win, so to speak, because the flexible person is trying to work with you and the bulldozer is, they're not trying to work with you. They're just pushing their agenda. They're just pushing over, emotionally speaking. So I don't know if I love that definition and that description, but that's the one I'll say for now. But I always enjoy when people ask me those kinds of questions. And you also ask, why do people do it? Well, it depends. With the Angela kinds of bulldozers, as what Hoop was saying and what I've said in the past, is that Angela seems to have have traumas around being bulldozed herself, being bullied herself. And she has been harmed maybe in her early childhood a lot. And so she has a policy that if there's any hint of someone having a shred of dominance over her or even equal power with her, she will make sure that she overpowers that person in every way, shape, or form, physically, emotionally, verbally. And so that's why I think Angela does it. Why Big Ed would do it, I think it's because he's running away from deep inferiority and deep feelings of being rejectable. And so he will use his charisma powers, if you will, or his verbal ability, because he has a pretty high verbal ability, in my perception, to bulldoze other people into doing things. Like Big Ed with Liz, for example, she'll say, I think we're going too fast. And he will sometimes bulldoze, sometimes back off. Anyway, then you ask, what is the emotional toll it takes on others? It's terrifying. And it shreds our trust in other people because it feels bad. I've been bulldozed before. I don't deal well with it because I'm not a bulldozer. And when people, I try to have conflicts go well. I don't like conflict. And so when someone is bulldozing me, it scares me. It feels like, what are you doing? And what else are you capable of? That's usually, I think, the implication in my fear is, if you're capable of this kind of aggression and hostility and pressure and disregard for me as a human being, what else are you capable of? It's usually the scary part of it. Elizabeth and Andre videos. Hannah says, I liked seeing Thomas. Thomas must be Becca's husband. I haven't heard his name before, but that must be him. I liked seeing Thomas backing up Andre because he was seeing how tight the spaces were for Andre to drive. At least someone had Andre's back. I can't imagine how he would have reacted if everyone had been against him in that tense situation. Yeah. I keep waiting for him to crash that RV. Abby says, LMAO, since when is booking a hotel a man's job? Yeah. Yeah, that was a pretty ridiculous conversation. It'd be fine if Thomas and Andre were just like, you know what, maybe we should book the things in the future to make sure we ask the questions because we don't really trust them to ask all the questions. But why do you have to genderize it? Monique says, we certainly do pick familiar chaos. Years ago, I met this guy and things were great at first, but very quickly we started having these huge arguments. Something was so familiar about it that I tolerated it. It felt normal. I eventually realized that we were having the same arguments I would have with my mom. Yes, we do pick familiar chaos for sure, for various reasons that I've talked about in my deep dives. Bao Bao says, I am pretty sure yelling in front of your kids is a bad thing. My parents were arguing a lot in front of me. Today, if someone is arguing, I escape and then I cry. Yeah, Bao Bao, that makes total sense. When we witness our parents arguing in front of us, it's very anxiety-provoking, very hurtful, and it can linger with us throughout our lives. Camille says, is fusion the same as undifferentiation? I thought fusion was a reference to a lack of boundaries within a family. Camille, this is a wonderful question. And yes, this is the reason why I avoid using the word fusion usually with my students because of this reason. So fusion has two meanings within family therapy. One is it's synonymous with undifferentiation, which can be associated with both having a lack of diffuse boundaries and rigid boundaries, meaning that so fused and undifferentiated. So you'll hear me talk about differentiation, right? Well, the opposite of differentiation is either undifferentiation, which is the word I usually try to use. And every time I use fusion, I try to follow it up with undifferentiation to delineate exactly what sort of fusion I'm talking about. So you have differentiation, you have fusion. But in boundaries, we have a different meaning of the word fusion, which is the opposite of disengagement. So we have boundaries in relationships, and we have this quality of relationships that we call the permeability of the boundary between us and other people. And sometimes we have general boundaries with everyone, and sometimes there's a specific boundary between two people, or between a family and the rest of the world, or something, And the flexibility, you want a good flexible boundary where it can be flexible to the outside world or between the two people, where there is an exchange of emotions and understanding and information, but not too much, because then it becomes fused. So when you have two permeable boundaries, you are seen as enmeshed or fused. And then the opposite of that is where the boundary is too rigid and too closed off, and then you're disengaged or distant. So fusion is synonymous with enmeshment in one set of concepts, and fusion is also synonymous with undifferentiated. The issue is you can be fused and undifferentiated while you were disengaged. So you can be disengaged from someone boundary-wise and fused with someone differentiation-wise. Does that make sense to people? Listen to all my episodes on family therapy and systems theory and all that stuff for more information. But Camille, that's a good question. And that whenever I talk about fusion with my students, I try to, in fact, I will tell people, stop using the word fusion, because we have better words that are more specific. Undifferentiated over here and enmeshed over here. Because fusion is too confusing. the xenophobia Elizabeth and Andre video, Lulu says, part of working hard and being successful is taking advantage of any and all connections or shortcuts you might find along the way. Right. So Lulu is referring to me talking about with Andre that he would be stupid if he didn't capitalize on his connection with his father-in-law who is offering him a job. And the other family members are saying that Andre is supposed to start from the bottom even though he doesn't need to. Why would you purposely start from the bottom when you could start, higher up because of a connection that you have? So part of working hard and being successful is taking advantage of any and all connections or shortcuts you might find along the way. Andre would be a fool not to ask for Chuck's help. There are probably tons of books, articles, cliches, and personal anecdotes. Lulu says antidotes, but I think they mean anecdotes, illustrating this concept. What does Charlie think networking is? And as Dr. Honda has stated repeatedly, Chuck could have said no, but he didn't, and that is Chuck's right. Right. By the way, just so everyone knows, we are having a 13-hour 13th anniversary live show on August 7th coming up from 10 in the morning Seattle time till 11 at night. So Umberto and I are going to live stream 13 hours straight, and we have all this stuff planned. Umberto wrote 13 songs. We have 13 top 13 lists that we got from y'all. We have 13 top Umberto stories. We're going to do some Q&A. We're going to open some gifts and some cards that y'all are sending us. And by the way, if you want to send us a card or a gift, you want to do it ASAP so it'll get to us by August 7th. And the address is Psychology in Seattle, 10002, that's 3 zeros, 10002 Aurora, as in Aurora Borealis, Avenue North, Suite 36, number 214, Seattle, Washington, 98133-9334. So yeah, join us there. While I'm on the topic, you can buy merch. I just got this shirt. I think I have like 4 of these shirts. I think it looks good in a lot of different colors. So you can click the link below, Teespring. Also, I'm on Cameo if you want to tell someone a happy birthday or happy anniversary or something. Also, if you didn't know, I never know if people know this, that I have an audio podcast. I'm not, I put the audio episodes on YouTube, but I find it much more convenient to listen on a podcast application on your phone. So you can do that and obviously become a patron. That's the main thing. If you do one thing in life for this podcast, for this YouTube channel, for me, is to become a patron of the podcast. And you get access to, I think, all of our best episodes. And also, if you're having trouble if you are a patron and having trouble listening to episodes, email in, go to our website, psychologyinseattle.com, click on the contact button, email in, and we might be able to help you tech-wise. There's a number of ways to access the premium episodes, so just email us there. Devin and Jihoon. Carissa says, I appreciate you speaking up for parents. I felt judged for years. Right, so I was saying that I didn't want to judge Devin's parenting because it's a very common thing for humans to do, to just judge people based on very little information. Momiji says, as a half-Japanese person, I am one of those people who apologize too much. I was programmed to apologize for things when they go wrong and blame myself even when it's not my fault. I have been getting better at it with the help of my therapist, but it's a hard habit to break. Yeah, it seems like Jihoon is a candidate for that. Jihoon says, I'm Korean, and over-apologizing is definitely something that we see a lot in our culture. Also, at the end of the video, it may seem like Jihoon has low self-esteem, but I think it is more cultural than that. Interesting. Good to know. Thank you for that. Jenny and Summit, which I'm having a hard time figuring out how to pronounce his name. Leanne says, I like that we get to pick what couples Kirk reacts to. Yeah, so I did a poll on YouTube, and The couples that people wanted me to watch were Jenny and Summit and Devin and Jihoon, Daniel, Mohammed, David and Annie, Anfisa and Fisa and Jorge, I'm guessing, or George, and Brittany and Yazan. And then those are the top of the list. The others were Sinjin and Tanya, David and Lana. David and Lana, I think I did watch, didn't I? In before the 90s a little bit. Michael and Juliana, Chantel and Pedro, Armando and Kenny. I know them because Stacy, the pod wife, would watch their season, and I would catch a little bit of it as I would walk through the living room. Marcel and Anna, Lyda and Eric, Stephen and Olga, Mark and Nikki, and Molly and Lewis. So I've got a lot of work cut out for me. But yeah, Lean Donut, absolutely. Your wish is my command. I wouldn't have even watched this show if y'all hadn't have told me to watch it. Because, I started with watching Love is Blind, and then people started commenting, you got to watch 90 Day Fiance. I'd literally never heard of the show before. I had never heard of the show before a year and, a few months ago. Dudu says, it's going to be 10 episodes of Dr. Honda being unsure how to pronounce Summit's name correctly because Jenny never pronounced it the same way twice. Yes, thank you, Dudu. By the way, I've already recorded a lot of episodes of Jenny, and I'm just going to say Summit for right now. And I'm saying Summit, but I'm positive I'm not pronouncing it right. But it's the way I hear him saying it. But Jenny will say Samit sometimes. And Jenny's daughter will say Samit sometimes. But he says Summit. Sumit. It's and I feel like it's in between a vowel that I can't pronounce. Like it's between Su and Sa. It's like this, anyway. So, and I looked online, but I couldn't find anything. Anyway. Meta says, hi, Doc. I'm from India. Oh, and I'm really excited that you're going to watch this series. Anyway, the correct way to pronounce his name is Sumith. Sumith. It's a very common name in India, Sumith. But he doesn't say Sumith. He says Sumit, right? Or Sumith. Sumith. Well, you're from India, so you would know. Alicia says, customer service manager here. Yes, the good training teaches you to de-escalate. So I was talking about, don't tell someone to calm down. You want to listen to them, and then they will calm down and prove that you're listening to them. Yeah, so good training in customer service teaches you to de-escalate. We address the issue, acknowledge the emotional impact, and then find a resolution for the issue, even if there's nothing much you can do. Then give options and ask if we met their needs. It doesn't always work, but about 70% of the time, it meets the customer's needs. MJL says, I've been stuck working from home with a toddler, so I've watched a lot of classic Sesame Street. Am I the only one who sees Bert and Ernie modeling this kind of healthy conflict on the regular? Kind of a random comment, but yeah, man, Bert and Ernie. Yeah. Well, I watched classic Sesame Street as a child. When I was a kid in the 70s, there wasn't a lot to watch. And Sesame Street was one of the only things you could watch. And it was glorious. It was a wonderful show. And Bert and Ernie, that was my favorite. I loved Ernie. I always felt like I could identify with Ernie. And some say, anyway, well, there's this whole theory about like chaos Muppets and order Muppets. Like, Kermit the Frog is an order Muppet, and Animal is a chaos Muppet, and Bert is an order Muppet, and Ernie is a chaos Muppet. And but I don't feel like I'm a chaos Muppet. I feel like I am kind of. Actually, I'm probably right down the middle, honestly. It might be surprising for some people to say here. Sun and Gray says, I used to catfish as a young teen. So we were seeing Summit. What is it? Because I swear to goodness, I heard him say Summit. Like submit. I think that's what my wife was saying. Because we were talking about this, walking the dog. She's like, I think it's pronounced summit, like submit without the B. Summit, but it's summit. Anyway. So bear with me because I recorded a lot of episodes where I'm pronouncing it summit, and it's just going to bother me. But anyway, we are also seeing that summit or sumith was catfishing. Sun and Gray says, I used to catfish as a young teen. Turns out that I was looking for connection because I was practically ignored by my stepmom and my dad. I also think that it was the beginning of symptoms of borderline personality disorder. I didn't like myself and felt ugly and unlovable as myself. It's so embarrassing and disturbing looking back at it now. As an adult, I could never do that. Through therapy, I've started to believe that maybe I'm not fundamentally unlovable. Well, good for you. I'm glad you're having that experience because there's no way that you're fundamentally unlovable. And that vulnerability and being loved as you are is what love is. I feel really bad for those that I affected with my catfishing, with my deceptive actions, and wish I could take it back. I apologized to them years later, but they were over it since we were just kids back then, quote unquote. Well, Sun and Gray, that's interesting. And that does provide me with some context as to why someone would catfish. And that was my suspicion, was that there's something going on with him that is hard to decipher, that we're not getting a lot of data on, that makes him believe that he would have to do that in order to get some kind of love and attention. And you could also make the argument, maybe I did in the video, that because he's under such a oppressive system of arranged marriages, that, I mean, to him, I want to point out that in cultures with arranged marriages, there are people who actually really enjoy that. There are people who say like, well, there's pros and cons to arranged marriages, but I really like it. Now, I will also say that it can often benefit men more than women in those cultures. So there's that. And there could be absolute horrific situations. In fact, there was a community near Seattle that I actually worked with as a therapist, and they were from a particular part of Mexico. I can't remember. They're a particular group of people in Mexico, and I think mainly native Mexican. And they had a practice of arranged marriages to young girls, like 11 years old or 10 years old. And the practice would be that you would essentially kidnap the child, or at least very much coerce the child as they're kicking and screaming, and you would put them. I can't remember the details because it was a while ago, but I think if a guy, and it was usually an older man, it was like a 20-year-old or 25-year-old man, be like, that 11-year-old I want to marry, he would kidnap her. And then they would hold the child in their apartment, and they all lived in a similar community apartment complex. And they would imprison the child, the 11-year-old girl, until the girl just gave up and succumbed to the situation. And some of the families where the children were being kidnapped from were okay with it, some weren't. And so these are atrocious situations, obviously, and they need to stop. And I don't care if it's a cultural element. That's clearly mistreatment of human beings. And there are other ways to find spouses, willing spouses. So I don't know what Sumith is dealing with exactly, but I think it's possible he's dealing with that system, not from the sexism side, but from the oppression and control side. And he might have felt like he was so trapped that the only way he could express his own desire for love and attention, where someone actually loves him instead of being arranged, was by catfishing, because if he said who he really was, his parents might find out, or he might actually have to interact with someone, which of course he believed he probably could never really do. So I get it. Doesn't justify it, though. And Sun and Gray, you're good to apologize. You're good to see it as deceptive and terrible behavior. You were a young teen, so, young teens are going to young teen, which is definitely, if a lot of us did ridiculous things when we were teenagers because we're children. And, but yeah, I feel like I just have to say that catfishing is bad and that it's not okay, because I feel like catfishing is becoming more normalized, as if, yeah, I catfish. Now, I don't know anyone who's doing that, but it just seems to this sort of culture of deception and lying. I don't know if I'm just getting old and shaking my hand at a cloud, but my fist at a cloud, but I just feel like there's this greater prevalence of normalization of deception, maybe because of anonymous online behavior. I don't know. But whenever I see stuff like this, I always want to say out loud, just to reassure myself, that deceiving others willingly is immoral. It's wrong. It's harmful. It is, your kindergarten teacher would know that that's wrong. Your kindergarten teacher taught you better than that. But Son and Gray, I get what you're talking about. You were practically ignored by your stepmom and your dad. You're made to feel worthless. You're developing symptoms of borderline personality disorder. You feel inherently unlovable, and you're desperate for some kind of connection, some kind of affirmation that you're a good person. And you could argue that you might have felt like you had to catfish, because if you didn't, no one would really love you for who you were. So that makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm glad that you're in therapy and you're getting help for that. Anyway, well, that does it for that episode in which I react to your comments. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself, take care of others, and go to therapy because you deserve it. You really, really do.